Chapter 12 Law of Agency. Where an agent, with express authority, enters into a contract with a third party on behalf of their principal and the third party knows they are an agent, who will the law recognize as parties to that contract? The principal and the third party. When an agent acting within the scope of their authority and having disclosed that they are acting as an agent enters into a contract with a third party, the parties to that contract are the principal and the third party. Where a principal of an agent has acted in such a manner as to lead third parties to believe that their agent has authority to perform certain acts on their behalf, and the third party, when dealing with the agent, reasonably believes that the agent has the authority that they represent. The agent is said to have apparent authority. What is the purpose of restating many of the common law fiduciary duties owed by a licensee to a client in the real estate services rules? A breach of a fiduciary duty may also result in disciplinary proceedings by the British Columbia Financial Services Authority. An agent's authority can be created retroactively by their principal by an action called ratification. Assume that a seller instructs his real estate licensee to make certain oral representations regarding a property that both the seller and the licensee know to be false. If the purchaser later sues the seller and the licensee on the basis of this misrepresentation, then the seller will be liable to the buyer because he explicitly authorized the tort. Which one of the following is false? An agent's authority to act on behalf of their principal may arise, contingently. A licensee is required to provide the consumer with a disclosure of risks to unrepresented parties form if the licensee is providing trading services to the consumer as an unrepresented party in such a way that the licensee must provide a disclosure of representation in trading services form to that unrepresented party, and the licensee is also representing a client in the same trade in real estate. In which of the following situations where express authority exists would an agent have authority to act? The agent is an infant. An agent's duty to the principal not to make a secret profit means that an agent must keep the principal fully informed about which of the following? All of the actual benefits and prospective benefits accruing to the agent as a result of the agency relationship. In which of the following ways would an agency contract not be terminated? By an act of a third party inconsistent with the continuation of authority. In a scenario where a licensee is directly or indirectly acquiring an interest in real estate and has complied strictly with the disclosure requirements of the real estate services rules, which of the following statements is true? The common law may still require further disclosure. Julie is acting as the listing licensee for a property owned by her client, George. Julie also represents a client, Ahmed, whom she is helping find a suitable property to buy. Ahmed becomes interested in purchasing George's property. Julie would like to continue to represent George as a client in the sale of his property, while releasing Ahmed as a client. To do this, Julie must enter into an agreement regarding conflict of interest between clients with both George and Ahmed. Robert asks Whitney to act as his agent at the auction of the effects of a deceased rock star. Robert was an enthusiastic fan of the deceased and tells Whitney that no matter what, he must become the owner of the deceased's vintage Rolls-Royce, which is painted in a most attractive paisley motif. Whitney is also told that under no circumstances is she to come away from the auction without buying this automobile for Robert. At the auction, the rock star's paisley Rolls-Royce is offered with a second pinstriped version of the vehicle. The two vehicles are offered as a package and accordingly, Whitney as the successful bidder purchases both vehicles for Robert. If asked to discuss Whitney's scope of authority, you would correctly answer that during the course of the fact pattern, Whitney was provided with both express and implied authority. If, under a principal's instructions, an agent makes certain representations concerning a property that are false to the knowledge of both the principal and the agent, which of the following statements is true? 1. The principal is liable because they explicitly authorized the tort. 2. The agent cannot escape personal liability by arguing that they were authorized to commit the tort. 3. The agent will be personally liable for the tort. The correct answer is all of the above. Which of the following statements concerning an open listing is false? The Real Estate Services Act requires all listings to always be in writing. The remuneration figures contained in the disclosure to sellers of expected remuneration form must be expressed as a dollar amount if the remuneration is to be received as money. Gertrude is the listing licensee for Anika in the sale of her property. Gertrude receives an offer from a buyer for Anika's property. When is Gertrude required to provide a disclosure of expected remuneration payment form to Anika? When Gertrude presents the offer to Anika. Which of the following events will terminate a real estate agency relationship? An act of the principal that is inconsistent with the continuation of the agent's authority. Ellie, a licensed real estate representative, entered into a written exclusive listing contract with Laura to list Laura's house for sale for $300,800. Shortly after entering into this agreement, Ellie's license expired. Unaware of the expiration of her license, Ellie proceeded to hold 3 open houses and several other showings of the house, eventually finding a buyer who offered $300,800 for the house. Laura accepted the offer, but when she learned about Ellie's license expiry, she refused to pay any commission to Ellie. Which of the following statements is true? A court will not award Ellie any form of remuneration in this situation. Which of the following statements respecting a real estate agency relationship is true? 1. The interests of the agent take priority over those of the principal. 2. The buyer of the property is always owed the agent's primary duty to act solely for their benefit. 3. The agent is an employee and works under the direct control and supervision of their principal. The correct answer is none of the above. In which of the following situations will the agency authority continue to exist? 1. Lorne lists his house for sale with Steve. The house burns down. 2. Lorne enters into an exclusive listing agreement with his agent Mark. Lorne then sells the property himself without Mark's assistance. 3. Lorne tells his agent over the phone that he no longer has the authority to sell his house. The correct answer is none of the above. Which of the following statements is true? Under the designated agency system, while the brokerage contracts with the seller or buyer, an individual licensee is appointed to act as the sole agent of that seller or buyer. In which of the following circumstances will an agent not be personally liable for their actions? The agent, identified as such, is mistakenly believed by a third party to be contracting as a principal. If a licensee falls into the narrow exception in the rules for the practice of dual agency, they must ensure that which of the following agreements is entered into before providing services within the dual agency relationship? A written agreement of dual agency. A gain or reward received by an agent from a third party in connection with their agency relationship with the principal, if it not disclosed to the principal, is known in agency law as a secret profit. Which of the following events will terminate an agency relationship? 1. Revocation of the agency by the principal. 2. Frustration. 3. Performance. All of the above are correct. Under the rules, what must a listing licensee do if the seller instructs them to withhold the disclosure of a material latent defect to a potential buyer of the property? The listing licensee must refuse to provide further trading services to or on behalf of that client in respect of the trade in real estate. Stevan, a trading services licensee, has been asked by her friend Jean to find a house and, if successful, Jean has agreed to pay Stevan the sum of $3,000 over and above any commission that Stevan would earn on the sale of the property. When Stevan finds a house acceptable to Jean, Stevan shares the commission with the other licensees involved and receives $3,000 directly from Jean. Stevan does not tell anyone of this $3,000 payment. Which of the following statements are true? Stevan has breached the provisions of the Real Estate Services Act. If there is no listing contract in existence but the agent effects a sale of the principal's property at the request of the principal, the courts will imply a promise to pay the agent remuneration. A person whom an agent represents is known in law as the principal. Which of the following statements is true with respect to listing contracts? 1. While a listing contract is a contract between the brokerage and the seller, the buyer is bound to some of the terms contained in the contract. 2. It is not necessary that an exclusive listing contain a specified duration or commencement date. 3. The open listing provides better protection for the agent than the exclusive listing. Correct. None of the above statements is true. Consider a situation in which the principal is the seller and the agent is the listing agent. Which of the following events will terminate the real estate agency relationship? An act of the principal that is inconsistent with the continuation of the agent's authority. Which of the following statements is false under the common law of agency? Where the agent does not disclose that they are an agent and enters into a contract with a third party, the principal can have no liability for the contract. Where a licensee is personally involved in a real estate sale, which of the following is not a part of the disclosure requirements under the Real Estate Services Act? The licensee must disclose any other properties currently under consideration by the licensee. An agent will be personally liable to third parties where the agent fails to disclose that they are an agent. A prospective buyer signs an offer on a property for $250,000 and mentions to the listing licensee that she would be willing to pay as much as $270,000 for the property if necessary. The listing licensee presents the offer to the seller without mentioning that the buyer may be willing to increase the offer. The seller accepts the offer of $250,000. This fact pattern is a breach of the agent's legal and ethical duty of full disclosure to her principal. Coralie asked Tim to sell her car and her mountain bike for her while she was away on holiday. She gave Tim the keys to the car and told him to accept any price in excess of $1,700 for the car and $300 for the bike. Which of the following is an example of implied authority? Before Charisse was willing to purchase the car, she insisted that she test drive the car and have it checked by the Automobile Association, which Tim allowed her to do. Which of the following is a key purpose of the disclosure of risks to unrepresented parties form? To encourage unrepresented parties to obtain independent professional advice in respect of the trade in real estate. Deborah is a trading services licensee. After providing her best estimate with respect to the value of Susan's property, Deborah lists the property at $600,000. Jennifer, who has learned that Susan's property is situated in the middle of an area to be redeveloped, immediately comes to Deborah with a full price, subject-free, offer. In response to Deborah's surprise reaction to the offer, Jennifer acknowledges that a redevelopment of the area is intended. Deborah does not advise Susan of the redevelopment as it might jeopardize the deal and, in any event, she feels that a redevelopment might cause the value of Susan's property to decrease rather than rise. Susan accepts Jennifer's offer and is delighted that the property sold so quickly. Which of the following statements is true? The proposed redevelopment might have affected Susan's decision to sell her property and therefore should have been brought to Susan's attention. The type of agency relationship that describes the situation where the licensee represents only one party as a client in a given transaction is called a sole agency relationship. An agency contract that specifies that the real estate brokerage shall be the sole agent for the owner with respect to the sale of property is called an exclusive listing. Adele is a trading services licensee acting for a developer who is purchasing large blocks of land in Vancouver for a large development. Adele purchases some lots in the area for himself and discloses his identity to the sellers as required by the Real Estate Services Act on those purchases. He does not mention the purchases to his principal, the developer. Shortly thereafter, Adele makes a profit on the resale of his lots due to the effects of his principal's development on the real estate market. What is this an example of? A profit for which Adele must account to his principal. You, as a trading services licensee working in a hot market, have recently listed a property for sale at $850,000. An offer of $840,000 was received at 8:30 this morning. At noon, a second offer of $845,000 was received and a third offer of $850,000 at 2:30 in the afternoon. You will be seeing the seller at 7 o'clock this evening. Which offer is to be presented? All of the offers. A multiple listing agreement is a type of exclusive listing agreement in which the contract requires the listing to be distributed to all members of the real estate board. Where an agent with authority enters into a contract with a third party and does not disclose that they are acting as an agent, the third party may sue either the agent or the principal to enforce the contract. Alan is Peter's agent with the express authority to rent Peter's cottage for the summer months. However, in his capacity as Peter's agent, Alan accepts an offer to purchase the cottage instead. When Peter discovers the incident, he is so impressed by the price, he calls and tells the buyers that he adopts Alan's act. Which of the following is the result of these actions at law? Peter has ratified Alan's actions, therefore the buyers cannot sue Alan for breach of warranty of authority. Which one of the following types of authority would not provide an agent with sufficient authority to create a binding contract between their principal and a third party? Assumed authority. What is the key purpose that is achieved when a licensee fulfills Section 54 of the Real Estate Services Rules and provides a consumer with a disclosure of representation in trading services form? Informed consent. Where a principal adopts a contract that their agent entered into without any authority, the agent is given authority retroactively to enter into that contract. Which of the following is not a duty that is owed by a principal to their agent? The duty to avoid conflicts of interest with the agent.